There's a common suspicion about metaphysics. It sounds abstract, detached, speculative, as if it were a system built in the air, far removed from how we actually come to know anything. Lonergan's claim is the opposite. He says that metaphysics is not built in the air, it's built from below, from the structure of knowing itself. And if that's right, then metaphysics is not guesswork, it's actually method. Today I want to show you how that works, how an analysis of knowing yields a method for metaphysics, and how that method grounds what the tradition called potency, form, and act, not as inherited categories, but as intelligible structure of reality as known. Let's begin with the problem then. By this point in the series, we've built a very specific account of knowing. We've distinguished experience, understanding, and judgment. We've shown that objectivity is not just looking, but the achievement of responsible affirmation. We have affirmed that the knower is a unified subject performing these operations, and we've seen that the notion of being is the horizon of all inquiry. But if you step back, you immediately notice something. There are still alternatives. There is still a tension. On the one hand, there is the realism grounded in the intelligent and reasonable knowing, and on the other hand, there is a realism of what Lonergan calls extroverted consciousness, the sense that the real is simply what is already out there now. And those two are not easily reconciled. He calls this an underlying problem. It's not a contradiction. But consciousness is polymorphic nonetheless. It operates in different patterns, the biological, the practical, the dramatic, the intellectual, and these patterns can conflict with one another. That is why philosophy has been so divided. So what is the solution then? Lonergan's answer is not to choose one side, it's to develop a method that can sort out what is valid from what is not. And that method begins with a distinction between positions and counterpositions. A position is a claim that is coherent with the structure of knowing we've established, and a counterposition is a claim that contradicts it. So, for example, it's a position to say that the real is what is intelligibly grasped and reasonably affirmed. It is a counterposition to say that the real is simply what is already out there now. Positions invite development, and counterpositions invite reversal. That is the dialectic of philosophy. You do not simply reject a counterposition, you show that it contradicts the very operations by which it is asserted, and then you reverse it. And in reversing it, you recover the insight that was hidden inside it. That is how philosophy progresses, not by eliminating disagreement, but by transforming it. Now, with that in place, we can actually define metaphysics. Lonergan gives a definition that is both simple but also demanding. Metaphysics is the department of knowledge that underlies, penetrates, transforms, and unifies all other departments. Now let's unpack that. It underlies all knowledge because it is grounded in the pure desire to know and the unfolding in experience and understanding and judgment. It penetrates all knowing because every science and every instance of common sense uses those same operations. And it transforms knowledge because it identifies and reverses counterpositions, biases, confusions, distortions. And it unifies knowledge because it integrates all the different fields into a single intelligible whole. That is metaphysics. Not a separate discipline floating above science, but the integration of all knowing. Now, Lonergan makes a crucial distinction. Metaphysics exists in three stages. First, it is latent. That is the stage we all live in. We are already operating with experience, understanding, and judgment. We are already asking questions, forming insights, making affirmations. So we already have a metaphysics, whether we know it or not. The second, it is problematic. This is where philosophy usually begins. We're aware that there are different views, different systems, different contradictions. We begin to ask, what is real? What is knowledge? What is objectivity? But we do not yet have a unified answer. Third, it becomes explicit. This is the goal, to make explicit the structure that was already implicit in our knowing, to articulate it, to affirm it, to use it as a method. And this leads us to the central idea of this chapter in Insight. Metaphysics is the integral heuristic structure of proportionate being. That phrase needs to be made concrete. It's important. A heuristic notion is a notion of the unknown. It anticipates what is to be known before it is known. A heuristic structure is an ordered set of such anticipations, and an integral heuristic structure is the complete set of them. Now you can apply that to being. Being is whatever is to be known by experience, understanding, and judgment. So metaphysics is the structured anticipation of everything that can be known, not its content, but its structure. Now here is the decisive step. Lonergan introduces the principle of isomorphism. The structure of knowing is isomorphic with the structure of the known. What does that mean? If knowing involves experience, insight, and judgment, then what is known will also have a corresponding structure. And that's not because we impose the structure on it, but because knowing and being are correlated. This is the bridge from epistemology to metaphysics. So, now we can state the method. The method of metaphysics is a process. It moves from latent to explicit, and it does so through three elements. First, a major premise, the isomorphism between knowing and known. Second, primary major premise, concrete affirmations about the structure of knowing. So, for example, that knowing involves experience, understanding, and judgment. Third, the secondary major premise, the actual content of science and common sense. That is, the data, the discoveries, the results. From these, metaphysics constructs an integrating structure. That is, a structure that unifies what we know and what we can know. Now, I want you to notice something important there. This is not deduction in the classical sense. Lonergan explicitly criticizes deductive methods. Abstract deduction is empty, it's vacuous. It deals with all possible worlds but says nothing about this one. Concrete deduction begs the question. It assumes what it is trying to prove. So metaphysics cannot proceed by deduction alone. It must proceed by method. A method that is grounded in the subject itself. And that brings us to a crucial point. Metaphysics is not something in a book. It is something in a mind. You cannot understand for someone else. You cannot judge for someone else. Metaphysics is a personal attainment. It exists only in the subject who performs the operations of knowing. This is why method is pedagogical. It begins where people actually are, not from ideal conditions, not from perfect clarity, but from confusion, from partial insight, from bias. And it leads them step by step, yes, towards self-knowledge. This is why the first directive of the method is simple. Begin from the desire to know. Not as theory, no, but as something operative, something already moving in you. And then clarify the structure of your own knowing, identify its distortions, correct those distortions, and then integrate what you actually know. Now, Lonergan adds an important warning here. Metaphysics does not replace science. It does not reconstruct common sense. It does not dictate results. It integrates them, but it also critiques them, because both science and common sense are affected by bias, dramatic bias, egoistic bias, group bias, general bias. So metaphysics applies a steady pressure, correcting distortions, reversing counterpositions, allowing positions to develop. So now, saying all that, we can return to classical terms: potency, form, act. Lonergan does not simply import them. He grounds them in the structure of knowing. Experience corresponds to potency, the given, what we can be known. Understanding corresponds to form, the intelligibility that is grasped. Judgment corresponds to act, that is, the affirmation that something is. And these aren't arbitrary categories. They are the structure of reality as known. So, let's summarize that because it's a lot. Metaphysics is not speculation. It is method. It begins from the subject. It analyzes knowing. It distinguishes positions from counterpositions. It develops and it reverses. It constructs an integral heuristic structure. It integrates science and common sense, and it yields a unified view of being. And that leaves us with one final point: the difference between science and philosophy. Science has a method that applies to many domains. Philosophy has one goal, the integration of all knowledge. So its method is not a technique applied repeatedly. It is the very process by which the integration is achieved. So, if we have to wrap everything into a single thesis for this episode, it would be that the method of metaphysics is the transition from latent to explicit metaphysics grounded in the self-affirming subject, guided by the structure of knowing and culminating in an integral heuristic structure of being. And here is a simple practice. Take something you know. Ask, what data does this rest on? What insights make it intelligible? What judgments affirm it? And then ask, what distortions might be present? What counterpositions might be hidden? And how would you correct them? That is metaphysics in operation. And next time, in the next episode, we'll move deeper from method to structure, from heuristic anticipation to concrete unfolding of being. So if this helped, like the video, subscribe, and turn on the notifications bell. Because at this point, we are no longer just learning ideas, we are learning how to think.